The 2024 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by Glossica.
Okay, let's get started. First, I'll just make sure I turn off my phone. Yep. Okay, so welcome everybody to this straightforward discussion about some of the characteristics of some of the major language families. So in this session, we're going to just be talking about some of the practical characteristics and unique features for practical reasons, practical benefits for language learners, but also for those of you who are also really interested in comparative linguistics and thinking analytically. So we'll just take a look at some of the shared grammar features, phonological traits, and even some common cultural bonds that these language families have. So a bit about me. My name is Adam. As you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from the United States, so English is my native language. Ale žiju tady v Praze už 16 let, tak jestli chcete mluvit česky po přednášce, samozřejmě můžeme bez problémů. Jeg snakker norsk også, fordi jeg var utvekslingsstudent i Norge da jeg var tenåring, så norsk er faktisk mitt andre språk, og jeg elsker å snakke dette fantastiske språket. Und ich habe auch Deutsch in meiner Schule in den USA gelernt. Und das ist sehr hilfreich für mich jetzt, weil ich in einem Land wohne, das an zwei deutschsprachigen Länder angrenzt. And as for these languages down here, the Romance languages, I'm trying my best at those. So if you do speak any of those, please don't be shy and help me out with some of those as we talk after the presentation. En special Romana. So you're probably all familiar with the famous linguist Noam Chomsky. Well, he said that if a Martian was looking at humans the way humans look at frogs, the Martian might conclude there is just one Earth language with minor deviations. Now, to us Earthlings, that probably sounds preposterous, it sounds crazy. Perhaps what he meant was he was trying to justify his theories on universal grammar. But actually, the more that we take a look at some of the language families, we actually see that we're actually speaking more similarly to our siblings than we may have originally thought. Whoops. So the development and spread of languages has been going on for at least 100,000 years, at least, creating this huge diversity of language families across the world. Now, the largest superfamily, let's say, is the Indo-European family, which has about 3 billion speakers across 150 different languages. So that is this blue one up here, Indo-European, because it's half in Europe and half in India. Now, you've probably all seen this slide before. I'm certainly not the only one using it in this conference. I've already seen about 3 other presentations. This is just a really fantastic slide, an image showing the Indo-European branch of languages. And that's something that all of us in this room, we all speak at least one Indo-European language. We all speak English in here. And in this presentation, we are going to be mainly focusing on the Indo-European branch of languages and taking a look at some of the major characteristics between within Romance, Germanic, and Slavic languages. But there will be some honorable mentions at the end because I couldn't resist. So the goal of today's presentation is to sharpen your comparative language skills, broaden your understanding of maybe the languages that you already speak or want to learn, help you recognize some patterns which will maybe help you achieve polyglot status faster, because you'll go into some of these language families knowing what to expect, or what what the challenging parts may be, or maybe what some of the easy parts may be. And of course, make you consider Chomsky's statement in the beginning, or at least maybe if we're just speaking dialects, really. So keep in mind, I'm not going to be going over all of the characteristics within each language family. There's far too many, and they're all equally interesting. But I did choose some of the major ones that I found to be quite unique. Now keep in mind, just like in any family, there's always the weird uncle, or the crazy sibling, or the brother or sister who went out and dated somebody new, and then, they are doing things a little bit differently now from the rest of the family. History happens, and there are reasons why maybe there are changes, or the one sibling does something a little different. So do keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Who here speaks a Romance language natively? Okay, wow. What about natively? Okay. All right, Joanna, you speak French. Yeah, nice to see you. All right, so you're basically speaking evolved Latin. So all of the Romance languages are descendants from Latin. They developed mainly in southern and southwestern Europe. These include languages like Italian, Spanish, French, Catalan, Portuguese, and Romanian as well. And they have also spread to the Americas and Africa, mainly through historic colonization. So all Romance languages have two grammatical genders, masculine and feminine. Now, Romanians in school, they learn that they have a third gender. But actually, it's not really a linguistic third gender. It's more of a category of masculine nouns that behaves like feminine nouns in the plural. So it's actually more of a transgender in Romanian. Not sure what happened in the Carpathian Mountains in the Middle Ages, but okay. Other than that, there's also, because they only have two grammatical genders, there is no neutral pronoun for it, something like what we have in English or in Slavic languages. And interestingly, they also distinguish between male and female plurals in articles and in pronouns. So here, for example, in French and in Portuguese, he and she, and they, but also for the masculine and the feminine. Romance languages are null subject languages. So that means you don't need to say I, you, he, she, we before a verb. You can just leave it out, because in the Romance languages, the endings are going to always tell you who is doing what. So you can leave that out. French is the weird sibling here, and that's because over time, as the sound decayed at the end of the verbs, it was needed for context to understand who was doing what. Now, conditionals are super interesting across the different language families, because they do express these in very different ways. Now, in the Romance languages, it's pretty interesting because their conditionals, and future tenses and conditionals, are usually expressed with a conjugation. Yo iré, yo iría in Spanish, j'irai or j'irai in French. It's put at the end. I would go, okay? And all Romance languages make use of the subjunctive mood. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because it's a pain for anybody who is learning a Romance language. But perhaps, somebody here, do we have a teacher of French or Spanish or Italian here? Yeah, okay. Maybe somebody can, real loud for everybody to hear, can you explain maybe what are some of the uses for the subjunctive, Kate? Yeah, sure. In Italian? Or some of the reasons. So speaking about a feeling, figure out feeling. What else? Maybe something hypothetical, perhaps. Yeah. Yep. So there's some very strange, also sometimes when the subject changes in mid-sentence, these are some uses for subjunctive. And this tends to be very complicated for speakers from other language families to pick up on. So if you are going to be learning a Romance language, get ready for the subjunctive. Also, in Romance languages, adjectives generally come after the noun. So here we have un uomo felice, un uomo felicit, or un uomo feliz in Italian, Romanian, and Catalan. A man happy. Okay, so it's backwards from some of the other Indo-European language families. And a fun fact about the Romance languages is that the names of the main days of the week are actually based on the Roman gods. So here we have an example from Romanian. So we have from Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, the names of the gods. I know any Portuguese speakers here are probably thinking, oh, we don't do that in Portuguese. But you can look up the history of the church didn't like that in medieval Portuguese, so they changed it. So now let's talk about the Germanic languages, and we all speak a Germanic language here, English. They're spoken mainly in Northern and Northwestern Europe. They include, of course, English, the Scandinavian languages, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish. There's also Icelandic, Faroese, Yiddish, Dutch, German, Afrikaans. And they spread to all continents through, of course, historic colonization. And even just thanks to, in more recent times, American and British pop culture and American and British economic power, most of us are, of course, speaking English today, even if not natively. Now, Germanic languages have a lot of vowel sounds. This is also something that you're really going to encounter if Germanic language is not your first language. I believe English has about 12 different vowel sounds, and keep in mind, this is not the International Phonetic Alphabet. I know that not everybody is familiar with that. These are just some orthographic representations of those sounds. I believe Danish has about also 11 or 12 vowel sounds. Standard Dutch and German have about 14. Standard Swedish has 17 vowel sounds. So you're going to really have to get used to a lot of vowel sounds. Romance languages don't even come close. Slavic speakers probably also, what's a vowel? Not familiar with that, so get ready for those in Germanic languages. There's also something called the Germanic umlaut and ablaut, which results in a sound change in the middle of words to slightly alter their meaning. So in English, we have mouse or mice, goose and geese, tell and told, old and elder, speak and spoke. In Norwegian, we have bok, bøker, mann, men, skrike, skrek, henge, hang. In German, man, männer, vogel, vögel, trinken, trank. So Germanic languages are all going to have this kind of strange vowel shift in the middle of words, whether it's for adjectives, nouns, verbs. They've also developed a strong sense of stress on the first syllable. So that triggered the phonological vowel reduction on all other syllables. So you're probably thinking, wie bitte? And exactly that, bitte. It's not bitte, like maybe in other languages would pronounce. It basically means there's a lot of schwa sounds, this kind of sound. It's bitte. And in English, in Scandinavian languages, German, Dutch, you're going to see this everywhere, okay? This E sort of disappears a bit at the end in pronunciation. Now, unlike the Romance languages, what we saw, where you don't need to use a pronoun before the verb, in Germanic languages, you always are going to need to use pronouns before the verbs. Here's an example from Dutch. I bring, you bring, he brings, we brings, you all bring, they bring, but you have to use the pronoun in front. And all Germanic languages, unlike the Romance languages, have a neuter pronoun it, and we use it everywhere. We use it everywhere. It's raining, it's snowing, it's hot, it's cold. And everybody's always asking who's learning a Germanic language, but what is it? Well, nobody really knows, but we say it all the time, okay? So it's a nice day. We say this all the time. Now, an interesting feature of Germanic languages is that they have a distinction in definiteness for adjectives. For example, in German, you have ein rotes Haus or das rote Haus. So a red house or the red house. Or in Dutch, een rood huis or het rode huis. And in English, we used to have this. So if you were to go back and you were to study maybe some Middle English, maybe read some works from Chaucer or other great writers from that time period, you will see this feature in English as well. But we became the weird sibling here. We lost that feature over time. And in Germanic languages, they form the conditionals by using the verb in the infinitive form. So like the Romance languages, add the ending to the verb to make it, I would go. In the Germanic languages, we use a word like would, and we always keep the verb in the infinitive form afterwards. All Germanic languages do that. And Germanic languages also make use of this verb to word order, which apparently is very uncommon cross-linguistically. And essentially what that means is that in any given sentence or clause, the verb should always go in the second place. So here, if you want to, in this example from German, if you want to say, let's say, tomorrow we're taking the train to Vienna, or you can say, wir fahren morgen mit dem Zug nach Wien. But if you want to start the sentence with tomorrow, morgen, you have to put the verb now in the second position. So it's not morgen wir fahren, but it's morgen fahren wir, etc., etc. All Germanic languages do this. Now in English, we have lost this feature to an extent. However, we still retain it in certain sentences. For example, only then can you go play. After the dinner came the speeches. Not until you finish your homework will you be able to go outside. Beside the bed stood a lamp. It would sound strange if you didn't use this formation in English. This is the verb to word order, which is common in Germanic languages. All Germanic languages make use of phrasal verbs. And who here has learned a Germanic language as a second language? Yeah, okay, seems like most of you. Who struggled with the phrasal verbs? Oh, yeah, you raised your hand really quickly. Yeah, just right up there. Yeah, these are super challenging for a lot of people when they are learning languages in this family. But yeah, it's just, you're gonna have to accept it. This is one of the characteristics. And in the Germanic languages, the main days of the week are based on Germanic gods. So we have Tu or Tyr, Odin, Thor, and Frigg. All right, so now let's move on to the Slavic languages. So these are spoken mainly in Central Eastern, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. It's actually the largest of the ethno-linguistic families in Europe, yet interestingly, they don't really get as much attention as they ought to. They consist of Russian, Ukrainian, Czech, Slovak, Polish, Bulgarian, the Serbo-Croatian varieties, Slovene. And they're really interesting languages because they actually remain fairly similar to one another especially when you compare them to some of the other Indo-European language families. And that's because they're actually still considered quite young among the Indo-European language families. And that's also a reason why they have more conservative, complex grammars, too. I mean, if you think about it, in the year 1000, there was already an English, there was already a French, and some sort. But most of the languages that were, to become the Slavic languages in Central and Eastern Europe, they were still in a really dialectical phase at that time. There is a funny anecdote that says that if you are to walk slow enough from Pilsen in the west of the Czech Republic all the way to Moscow, you'd be able to understand everybody along the way, because the West Czech dialect would so slowly blend into the Moravian dialect, which would slowly blend into the West Slovak dialect, to the East Slovak dialect, to Rusin over here, into the West Ukrainian dialects, to the East Ukrainian dialects, and suddenly you're in Moscow and you're able to understand everybody along the way. Now, I don't know if that's because it really is a dialect continuum, or if just the alcohol gets stronger the further east that you go, so you understand everybody more. Now, all Slavic languages have 3 genders: a masculine, a feminine, and a neutral gender. They have a really rich system of suffixes or endings to words to show case, gender, number, and a lot of other interesting factors. Most Slavic languages have 6 or 7 noun cases. Czech, for instance, has 7 noun cases. And they also have different declination patterns depending on if a masculine noun is actually alive or not alive. And this is something that I think probably anybody who's learning a Slavic language can relate to, the endings. For those of you who are visiting Prague for the first time, you're probably looking at words. I mean, you're all polyglots here, so you're probably looking at words everywhere that you go, and you're questioning, like, why are there so many different endings to all of these words? Well, it's actually showing a lot of meaning behind it. For example, this is an adjective which means nice or good looking in Czech, and these are all the different possible ways to say that word, depending on case or number or gender or comparison, or if it's alive or not alive. So get ready for memorizing a lot of tables. Now, what gives Slavic languages that unique sound that they have? Well, they make very heavy use of consonant sounds, especially sibilants. These are sounds like s, z, ch, zh, ch, and zh. And they also make use of palatalized consonants. So these are sounds like d, t, l, n, s. You hear that they appear quite frequently in these languages. And they're known for having some really complex consonant clusters. So for in Czech, we have čtvrtek, zmrtvýchvstání, or vtrchl. Now, do we have any native Polish speakers here? Yes, would you, nice and loud for everybody to hear, could you read the top 2? Beautiful. Beautiful. Do we have any native Russian speakers here? Yeah, nice and loud. Can you read these? Yeah, the transliteration, of course. Beautiful, thank you. Now, interestingly also about Slavic languages is when we come to plurals. Now, in Romance languages, plurals are very easy. In Germanic languages, they're slightly more complicated, especially because of that Germanic ablaut, which we talked about, the sound change. But in Slavic languages, 5 seems to be the magic number. So here's an example from Czech, and again, all Slavic languages do this. You have 1 train, 2, 3, or 4 vlaky, so 1 vlak, 2, 3, or 4 vlaky, or 5 or more vlaku. why it just happened. So interestingly though, it's actually not a nominative plural, it's really a genitive plural. So a more literal translation would be 1 train, 2, 3, or 4 trains, and 5 of trains, okay? So in any number more than 5, this happens. Interestingly, all Slavic languages have perfective and imperfective verb aspects. So what that means essentially is that if you have an action that you have done once and you've completed it, you're going to have to use a certain verb for that. And then if you have an action which maybe is incomplete, or you do it regularly or all the time, you're going to have to use a different verb for that. Again, all Slavic languages do this. So for example, to give you a practical example what that means in Czech, here we have říct or říkat, which is to say. So you'd use this form, říct, if you just say something once, like maybe you told your friend something and that was it. But then you would have to use this verb, říkat, if you always say something, or she's always saying something about this. If you're on the tram and you want to get off at the next station, you're going to have to use this form of the verb, vystopit. So you're going to get off once. But if you're talking to your friend about, let's say, where you always get off at a specific station, where you go to the gym every week, then you're going to have to use this other form of the verb. For me, learning Czech, this was actually the most complicated thing to learn, even more than the 7 cases. Because you really need to keep in mind, how often are you doing something? Do you do it all the time? Did you complete it? Did you do it just once? It's something that I still find myself messing up sometimes. Back to the conditionals. In the Slavic languages, they form the present conditionals by using the verb in the past tense. So I would go in Slavic languages is more like I would went. So that's also something it kind of takes your brain to adjust to, because if you're thinking about something you would do in the future, you have to use a grammatical structure that you probably learned beforehand was in the past. So that's also something a bit challenging. And all Slavic languages famously lack articles a and the, but for some reason, Bulgarian and Macedonian, they have the article the. So they developed that somehow over time, probably because of the region that they were in. They also have articles down there. And interestingly, a fun fact about the Slavic languages is that the main days of the week are actually based on counting. So here we have, for example, 2nd, middle, 4th, and 5th. And I couldn't resist to put some honorable mentions in here at the end. I've done a lot of research on this topic around many different language families. I thought the Indo-European ones, the main Indo-European ones, are probably the most practical for most of you here. But just for some interesting honorable mentions. In 3rd place, we have some Semitic languages. So these include Hebrew, Arabic, Amharic, Maltese, and they are known for having a tri-consonantal root system where words are constructed around a core set of 3 consonants. So, and then vowels are placed all around them to make different, morphological derivations for more words. So here in this example, we have a k to b sound, which probably somehow has to do with writing, and all of these different words have that root within them. So all of these languages up here, they all do something like this if you are going to be studying them. 2nd place, we have Uralic languages, which include Hungarian, Finnish, Estonian, Sami, and some other languages spoken in Siberia. They completely lack grammatical gender. They don't even differentiate between he or she. They use postpositions to form some really complex words. Do we have any native Finnish speakers in here? Yeah? would you mind nice and loud reading this example word of the possibilities of the Finnish language? Oh, very nice. Thank you. Now, of course, these can be used in comical situations, but it still just shows the possibility of the language family and what this language family can accomplish by stringing together a lot of suffixes in their words to form really long words. And in first place, I had to put Polynesian languages. So first of all, they have a very scarce amount of consonants. There's not too many. If we take a look at Hawaiian, these are the only consonant sounds they have in their whole language. That's it. But they do have a lot of vowels. And in fact, there are words which can be 5 or 6 vowels in a row, and that's an entire word. They also reduplicate to form new words. So for example, in Maori, you have paki, which is to clap just once, but paki paki is to applause. And they do this a lot with a lot of things. So you'll hear this sort of reduplication of sounds and of words in their language family. But I think the coolest thing about Polynesian languages is that they distinguish between inclusive and exclusive pronouns of 2 or 3 or more people. So for example, what does that mean? So here in this chart, which I'm so glad I was able to find online, you have here ahau, which means, I. Then you have koi, which means you. Ia, which means he or she, okay? Then you have tawa, which is we two, including the person that you're speaking to. Maua, we two, excluding the person that you're speaking to. Korua, you two, not me. Rawa, they two, but not us. Then you have tato, we 3, including me. Mato, we 3, not including you. Koto, you 3, but not including me. And rato, them 3 or more, but not including us. I mean, brilliant concept. We should adopt that. I think it's a really cool concept. So just to recap what we've learned today, I hope this helped you sharpen your comparative linguistic skills. We looked at some of the unique features from Romance, Germanic, Slavic, Semitic, Uralic, and Polynesian languages. Hopefully, now knowing some of these patterns and unique features will help you be prepared what to expect in your language learning journey, and maybe even help you achieve polyglot status even faster. And I guess maybe for you to consider what you think about Chomsky's statement, or if we're maybe at least just speaking dialects within our own family. Cool, so thank you so much. Oh, we have some questions here. Oh my gosh. Okay, what are some of your favorite resources to learn about comparative linguistics? I think, honestly, I think encyclopedias. So if you just look up, whether it's Wikipedia or Encyclopedia Britannica, or even any of the other online encyclopedias, and you just look up Germanic languages or Slavic languages, usually they will have the history of how they developed, but also some of the common features that they have. And there's so many more that are so fascinating than what we just talked about in this presentation. Could you recommend some books or resources? Okay, that's basically the same thing. Any tips on how to memorize phrasal verbs in Germanic languages, please? I have to admit, this is very difficult for me to recommend because a Germanic language is my native language. So, growing up, I never really thought about how to learn these things. It's just intuitive in the logic of the language. And when I've studied other Germanic languages and been exposed to phrasal verbs, of course, and Norwegian and German, it sort of already naturally makes sense because I have that logic natively. So to learn, I guess probably just exposure, maybe memorizing. Maybe if anybody else has a tip, if they've learned a Germanic language, yeah?
Well, I'm a native teacher of German, so whoever asks this question or anyone else struggling with this topic, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, just a short tip on the side. I would recommend not to struggle desperately to drill them into your head by memorizing grammar tables, as it's going to drive them crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about German is they do not only combine any possible prefix with verb, but prefix itself. Once you learn one meaning of ablien, there are going to be 6 or 7 more. So my piece of advice would be to pick them up as you go. So when you have them in context, then create a table with separate columns and contextualize it. So jot down the phrase where you came across it, and next time you come across a phrase and verb, maybe the same or a similar one, add to the column, but only as you pick them up from exposure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so exposure, as she mentioned, make some tables, contextualize them. Are there theories for why Polynesian languages develop so many ways to express inclusion and exclusion? I don't know enough about the topic to go into that level of detail. Maybe, there are some really interesting features of Polynesian languages in general, especially when you take a look at their concepts of taboo. Basically, things you're not supposed to say. When you take a look at the Polynesian languages, for example, their sound pattern changes. When you look at Maori or Hawaiian or Tuvaluan or Tahitian, whatever, there are predictable patterns where the sounds change, and you can pretty much guarantee one word in one language is going to be pronounced, a certain way in the other language. Whenever there's an exception, and all of a sudden a word in one Polynesian language is different than the rest of the family, it's usually because, for whatever reason, something associated with that word, speaking that word at some point in history became taboo. So, for instance, in some of the islands, maybe there could be a word for, and this is just an example here, to stand. And in all the languages, it will be pretty much the same word. But in one language, maybe there was a king in the past, or a tribal chief, and his name was like he who stands tall, for instance. But maybe when he died, no one in the community can ever utter those words again. So they needed to come up with a new word for to stand. So there are usually these very strange instances of taboo, which have influenced the languages of the Polynesian cultures. So perhaps there could be something associated with that in a sort of, inclusive and exclusive way of speaking to the community. I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here with you, but it would be super interesting to investigate more. Have you ever looked at Basque, which doesn't belong to any language family, and compared to other language families? What have you noticed? Oh, I would love to look at Basque. Actually, yesterday I went to the presentation in here from Angel, and he was talking about Basque and some of the unique characteristics. So I would definitely recommend you check out his presentation when it's online on YouTube afterwards. What's the absolute weirdest, most remarkable linguistic feature that you found in a language? This was tough because I was also thinking for first place to maybe put in the Celtic language family because they have some really interesting features in the sense of, while the Slavic languages have all these suffixes at the end to show the endings to show different meaning. In the Celtic languages, they change the initial sounds of words. So, for example, I do not speak any Celtic language at all, okay? But just to give you a concept of how it would work in English, if let's say, somebody over here, her name was Natalie, Natalie is here, I see Vatalie, okay? Or hi, hattily. So the beginning of the word is going to change sound. And I think that's really interesting and something quite unusual. I think maybe just one more question. If you could choose one feature of another language family and apply it to English, which would you choose? Definitely not 7 noun cases, that's for sure. Definitely not grammatical genders either. But maybe the Polynesian inclusive and exclusive we, because sometimes that could be like the person maybe think that they're included, but no, or you actually want them to feel included also. So maybe something like that. Do we have any more time? 2 minutes? Okay. Which language makes easier the learning or understanding of other languages? I think probably as long as you learn a language that's not a language isolate and that is part of a bigger family, it is your doorway into learning more languages. And as Richard said in the presentation before, when you go down in memory and you find those dinosaur bones, you can use them and revive them and build upon them. How can we tell that Romanian's third gender is actually just a special category of masculine? If they behave differently, does that make it another gender? No, it's not another gender, because if you take a look at other language families, like Germanic languages or Slavic languages that actually do have a third gender, the pattern works where that third gender, the way that adjectives or even verbs associated with it are conjugated are a completely different pattern. It's not following the pattern of the masculine and the feminine. It's really 3 very distinct ways of identifying those nouns. In Romanian, they don't have a completely different way of doing things. These are a category of nouns where they are exactly like masculine in the singular form, but somehow in the plural form, they act as feminine. So it's more of this transgender rather than a third gender. And that is it for questions. Thank you so much. Thank you.